This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my two best friends and one of their moms. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we live that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned to have a pretty calm night, watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drop is at 9. So at around 8, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by and spent about 15 minutes dancing, but didn't get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel being gay, they were stoked on it and wanted to come back after the ball drop, even though it was about 90% men there. We continue on to the block party, get some dinner, and a glass of champagne. The ball dropped and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there dancing as well. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we get there, Sarah's mom pays for a drink for each of us, but leaves soon after that because she was tired. It's about 10:30 at this point, and Sarah, Rachel, and I are enjoying our drinks and having fun dancing. Rachel tried some of my drink, since it was one she hadn't had before. I consistently have my guard up when drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men, who I thought would not have an interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor, and I was almost unresponsive. Rachel, now worried, somehow drags my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming I was wasted, just asked us to leave. Sarah and Rachel decide to take me back to the hotel, which is about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious and there were barely sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us, who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied with trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I even threw up all over myself, the both of them, and the sidewalk. The next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was incredibly agitated and told him to leave, that her friend needed help right now. He didn't take no for an answer though, and continued to follow us down the street, persistently asking if they want to get drinks with him, if he can help carry me and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this came up and told the man off, something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women, or I'm going to call the police." He left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife enjoying the holiday ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong, and then carried me the rest of the way to the hotel and into the room, since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory kicks back in. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door, and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man followed us to the hotel, and they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends then called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory was at the bar getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything that happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have drank way too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I had didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, since Rachel had some of it and had no memory of her walk home, even though she was fully functional. I'm sure that man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one that slipped something into my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something. I got my drink from the bar and never set it down. My best guess was that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I had good friends and kind strangers protecting me that night. It keeps me up at night thinking what could have happened under different circumstances. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days, and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road, surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face, enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on the USA channel. I had most of the lights on in the house, not because I was afraid, but because I was 13, I wasn't concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party or people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panicked daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking that the power must have gone out, and that it would be back on soon, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed, but then I heard a noise in the kitchen, where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest, because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason I wasn't completely overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark room to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large, 6-foot iron cage and was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. This information will become relevant later in the story. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that could easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears, when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me. I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement to wake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed/couch. It was a bunk bed with a futon on the bottom, and waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. and it was also several feet off the ground as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under the bed, terrified for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not and am still not the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed the back door was wide open. Scared but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this move could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. So, terrifying, laughing crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve, please let's never meet again. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't know if you were just some drunk visitor of a neighbor, but you terrorized me that night. I was afraid of being alone when my mom was working. To this day, I still get scared when I'm home alone, overthinking what I would do if someone came inside and where I would hide. When my cats make noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate for fear it's someone trying to get in. P.S. My mom had to help lift me back into my bedroom window so I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and closet. We never had another incident at the house. We moved into town to an apartment a year later. I'm in London, UK. In 2020, we were in a Tier 4 lockdown, which meant stay in your home, only go out for one shopping trip or exercise, no mixing with people outside of your own home or support bubble, etc., etc. With the mutating strain of COVID-19 rampaging through London, hospital beds nearly at capacity and death toll rising, it made sense to stay indoors as much as possible at the time. But every human has a breaking point, and mine was 8 days of wandering around my one-bedroom apartment. I had talked myself out on Zoom, run out of conversations to talk to myself about. At 10 p.m. New Year's Eve, I decided to get some air, which was allowed within the rules of Tier 4. I went for a quick walk around the perimeter of a local park, all on main roads, which takes about 40 minutes. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store and pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. I stepped out, with mask firmly affixed, and started walking. One thing that I was not prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. On hindsight, a big mistake. Navigating myself through the very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van. It was a Mercedes Sprinter size, and turned in and rapidly approached me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by two men, between 25 to 40 years of age. Then it completely stopped. Windows rolled down, and one man leaned out. "Hey friend, we're lost. Can you tell me how to get to this station?" The accent was not from the UK, and I'm not going to state its origin, as I'm not going to get into any stereotypes. Alarm bells began to ring out immediately. What was a van doing out at this time, and why directions to the local train station, in the middle of a Tier 4 lockdown? The van had stopped, so the side door was facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly. "I did not understand at all. I think it's best if you show us." With that, he opens his door, and then the side door of the van is opened, to reveal another two men. I immediately just turned and ran down the side street that I had emerged from. "Shit, take the van around. I'll follow him." Knowing that these guys were fitter and younger than I was, a foot race to my apartment building was out of the question. The only advantage I had was a head start and hopefully local knowledge of the streets. The side street led into a larger street that has homes with all sorts of large hedges. I ran past a few homes and entered the front garden of a house that had the most imposing and opaque hedge. It was unlit, and I ducked down. Luckily for me, that house did not have a motion sensor light. Within a few seconds, I could hear footsteps. They went past me, and then stopped. I peeked through the hedge vegetation. It was a very limited view to see the man who had asked for directions. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around. Then I heard the sound of the vehicle. I thought, oh no, the van. Luckily for me, it was just a car. The man looked at his phone, looked around, pretending he was checking something, and then walked away, leaving the residential street as quickly as possible. The car continued its way. I waited for another 10 minutes, sitting behind the hedge in the front garden, practicing an explanation if the house lights came on. The house stayed unlit, and after my allotted time, I rose and quickly walked back to my apartment building, keeping the shadows and reacting to every sound. I made it back and bolted the front door. Only when I sat down did I understand what I had just avoided. All of this for some air and a bottle of red? I poured myself a black coffee and debated calling the police. But what would I have even said? Had really anything happened that they could act on? Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not have been a priority, especially on a night that they would be overstretched on anyway. I just waited in the new year, realizing that I had a lucky escape, and that I should stock up on red wine at a more decent time. I never actually thought something would happen to me. I've always enjoyed reading real-life creepy stories, and have developed quite the imagination and paranoid persona, something I always thought would just be a novelty. A few years ago when I was 19, a female, I was coming home from watching the fireworks display on New Year's Eve. It was 3 a.m. when I reached my safe, family-friendly, nothing-ever-happens neighborhood. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and live in a posher and wealthier area. My friends wanted to call a taxi, because we didn't want to wake up our poor parents at this hour to drive us back home. Because of my stubbornness and insistence, we ended up taking the very long walk home. My friend Aiden was complaining most of the time. Guess you can't blame him. Rowan was just silent and compliant. I was cheerful. When we reached almost my street, we split ways. The guys continued on their very long way home, which was much longer than mine. When I passed the little cake shop, I noticed a guy across the street. I only looked at him briefly, but something in the way he quickly looked up at me, almost in interest, caught my attention. I hurried on my way, because I'm usually paranoid about things, and 99% of the time it's just me. I turned onto my street, which was much darker than I anticipated. This was about 3:15 a.m., mind you. As I passed the bowling club and the oval, I kept looking behind me just to make sure. It was getting quite cold and dark, so I started feeling creeped out, but there was no one behind me, no one anywhere as far as I could see. I was halfway down my street where the road dips down when I noticed something on the path in front of me. I couldn't tell what it was, and at the last minute I stepped off the path onto the road to avoid it, because it looked like it might be a dead animal or something. And as I stepped back onto the road, I turned slightly, and I saw that there was someone behind me now. They weren't too close, but they weren't too far away either. I remember my heart leapt into my throat because I hadn't seen them before, and for them to have gotten that close in that short space of time, something about it didn't sit well with me. When I told people about this later, they said I should have been more suspicious then. It's 3 a.m. in the morning, and you're quietly walking behind a girl, not even bothering to keep a safe distance? Like, if you're really innocent, you would take measures to emphasize that, right? I couldn't see who it was, nor could I tell if it was a male or a female, because it was just a black figure to me. It was a very brief glimpse. I was scared though, so I whipped out my phone and started to call Aiden. I kept calling him, but silly Vodafone wouldn't connect me to him. So I tried to call Rowan, but he wouldn't pick up. I kept this up at least 5 times, getting increasingly anxious, but not daring to look behind me to see if he was still there. I'm glad I didn't, actually. I think I would have really freaked out if I had confirmed it. By that time, I'd reached my driveway and I hurried up it, thinking that I was safe. But as I was halfway up, I looked over my shoulder again, just really quickly, and I saw the figure there again. The way I explain this next bit is really confused and muddled, because on the one hand, it may have looked like he was merely passing my driveway, but on the other hand, I am much more certain that it looked like he was just about to step onto the driveway, as if to walk up it. And at that precise moment that I thought that, it occurred to me that he might be my brother, Jonathan. because no one else would bother walking up my driveway. Even if some guy was following me, it never occurred to me that they would really go the lengths of going up the driveway as well. I thought I was completely safe because I had the advantage of having my house close by when he started following me. However, something about the build of this figure didn't seem like Jonathan to me, so I hurried on anyway. My beautiful, wonderful, amazing mother had stayed up to wait for me, and I am so glad because she opened the door for me as soon as I knocked. I hate to imagine what would have happened if I had to wait there for a while. I went inside, but I left the second door open and the outside light on because I thought, Jonathan might be coming in any second now. But Mom was like, "You can turn them off, your brother came back 2 hours ago." I did get a little creeped out then, but I just dismissed the thought, closed the door, shut off the light, and went to get a drink of water. Mom went to bed. I went to my room to grab my clothes, and then went to the bathroom to take a shower. I switched off the living room lights. This is sort of funny now that I think about it. Before I took a shower, I replied back to a message from Aiden, who was asking if I was home safe yet. I demanded to know why he hadn't picked up his phone, and then told him that I was creeped out for a few minutes, but I was okay now. Then, as I showered, I actually thought about that figure. I wasn't too convinced that it was following me, but my mind did teeter into wondering this or that. In any case, I remember thinking that it was okay now because I was at home, safe. Then, near the end of my shower, I heard something at the window. It didn't sound like the usual creaking or bumping of an old house. The way I described it to other people was like the sound of someone resting their hands against the window to steady themselves. It sounded really unnatural, I know, because it caught my attention straight away, and I immediately jumped to the possibility that there might be someone outside. And I know that only a really strange sound would make me do what I did next, which was to turn off the water and crouch under the window, hiding and waiting. I waited for quite some time, too scared to move. For a few minutes, I think. But there was nothing. So I gingerly crawled out, still too scared to stand up properly, and I switched off the bathroom lights. But then it was impossible for me to dry and dress myself, so I turned on the heater light, which is much smaller and dimmer. But as I did, I noticed at the window that there were very small blue lights there that certainly never belonged there. The way I can describe it now, it was almost like a keypad of a phone lit up. I was so scared, but I switched off the heater light as well and backed into the corner, my towel wrapped around me, and I waited. It seemed like a long time that I waited, too scared to unlock the door and move because I knew it would make a lot of noise. And as I waited in the pitch darkness, several blue lights came on outside the window, like a few. It became very bright, and they were moving it, trying to shine it through the window. Now that I think about it, was it a phone? I'm not sure. There were a few lights. But that did it. I practically bolted for my mom. I unlocked the door and went into my parents' room, trembling like a leaf and gibbering that there was someone outside the bathroom window. I was clearly very upset, so Mom ushered me around trying to find a safe room for me to change into, and Dad apparently heard the footsteps hurrying back down the driveway, and I'm glad that he did, because the situation feels so surreal to me now that I'm not even sure it really happened. Maybe I imagined it all, but this feels like confirmation that it wasn't just my imagination. I was so shaky, I slid into bed and couldn't sleep the whole night until it was morning. And even when it was morning, I was terrified, especially when I heard Dad leave the house and go into the backyard. So, that's my lesson learned. Never walking home at night again. I'm even a bit worried during the daytime now. We never did find out who it was. People wonder if it was the same person I'd passed earlier, but I don't think so. My brother doesn't think so either. He says it may have been someone lurking at the oval, who came out of a little hole as I walked past that supposed dead animal on the path, because of how suddenly they appeared behind me. Please don't walk home alone at night, girls. It only takes a moment for you to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it can go very wrong. I attended what was expected to be a super fun party ringing in 2015 at a close friend's home. I expected to be awake until dawn, so I made sure to eat a big dinner and arrived late to the party around 11 p.m. with two of my best friends. We're a pretty tight-knit social group, and despite the party being a combination house show with several bands playing, I knew virtually all of the 60 or so people who were already there when I arrived. Among friends and acquaintances, everyone was celebrating, drinking, and having a great time. I had planned to meet up with some other friends around 2 a.m. when they were done bartending a public event, so I was drinking socially but in moderation. I'm no stranger to the sauce, and I have a healthy tolerance too. By midnight, the party had grown to at least 100 people, and by this time, there were people drifting in from neighboring parties and the surrounding university area, despite attempts to limit attendees to people we actually knew. I opened my third beer at 1 a.m. and continued taking photos, snaps, and messaging other friends who were not there. Around 1:30 a.m., I started to feel really drunk, and thinking that perhaps I was just overwhelmed by the constant activity all around me, I stepped into the mostly empty living room for a breather and to message my friend. I sent her a message inviting her to the party, as we'd planned on meeting up. As I finished my message, I felt someone come up behind me. He pressed his body against me as he grabbed my hip. As I straightened up, I could feel him bending down slightly to whisper into my ear. But it wasn't a whisper. He clearly said to me, "In a few minutes, you aren't going to remember anything. And then, I'm gonna rip the shit out of you." I froze. It hit me. I wasn't feeling really drunk. The confusion I'd attributed to social anxiety or the large crowd I was experiencing because I had been drugged. I knew I had only moments to prevent the inevitable. I ran from him best I could and didn't turn around. I went and retrieved my purse and jacket and started calling the two people I meant to meet up with at 2 a.m. I was so out of it, I was having a hard time communicating what was happening. I started crying, moving through the house, trying to find someone I could explain it to. I was too disoriented. Thankfully, friend number 1 was able to leave from bartending early and came to get me. He called me, and as I ran outside, the creepy guy literally chased me. I got to my friend's car, and as I started to black out, he said the creepy guy was trying to wave him down, shouting to him that he, the creepy guy, was my friend, was going to take me home. Friend number 1 told me I just kept saying, "Drive, drive," and he took me home where we met up with friend number 2 who was bartending the event. At 2:30 a.m., I lost consciousness and remained unconscious for 5.5 hours. They were shaking me, trying to get some kind of reaction. Nothing. I didn't respond in any way. They sat up with me throughout the night to make sure I was okay. Around 7 a.m., I somehow managed to get up and climb into my bed. At 9 a.m., I awoke with a start and had no idea where I was. I was so relieved to discover I was safely at my own home. I was high for a total of 20 hours and didn't feel normal again for several days. I don't think I'll ever know who drugged me, and I have only a vague description to work from. Last night was New Year's Eve. My husband, myself, and 2 other couples went out to a strip of bars for the night. We all got completely shit-faced. We were drinking and smoking throughout the night. Right after midnight, I stopped drinking because I didn't want to be hungover, but kept smoking. This is relevant later in the story. So, it's 2 a.m. I walk outside and realize that the person who had got the Uber was not only shit-faced, but his phone was dead. He had put the Uber app on his phone just for this occasion, so we were left to all figure it out. We're from somewhere that doesn't really have Uber, so it's all new to us. Anyway, it's cold as hell. The drunkest one of us all is the one trying to get Uber on her phone, and at this point it's very dark and there's not a soul in sight. A guy comes up to our group and asks us if we have a cigarette. We all say no, and he starts talking to the guys in our group. He has a big-ass smile on his face and crazy eyes. He starts trying to joke around about fucking one of us or something, and my husband finally tells him that he needs to walk away. My husband is extremely confrontational, especially when he's drunk, but at that point he doesn't think too much about the creeper, he just wants him to leave. About 3 minutes later, the same guy comes back up to us and asks us if we have a cigarette like it's the first time he's seeing us. I was extremely high and started to realize just how fucking weird this guy is being. My husband tells him to leave, and he starts getting an attitude with us. He walks away, but I start watching him and he just turns the corner from the building we were standing at and stops to stare at us. I try to tell everyone in the group that we need to just start walking and get away from this guy, but no one is paying attention to me. Everyone is completely belligerent. Like I said, I was extremely high, so I thought I was the only one paying attention, and it was making me even more scared. At one point, my friend's husband says he thought he had an Uber, but he was just pressing random buttons the entire time. That's how bad we were. Homeboy shows back up asking for another cigarette, and my husband loses it and tries to fight him. We're all telling him to back down, it's not worth it, etc. I see Crazy Eyes run around the corner again, and I'm so high and paranoid, I'm begging everyone to just call the police. Everyone is blowing the whole situation off, but I was convinced he was planning something. All of a sudden, Crazy Eyes screams, "You're under arrest!" and comes charging at us with his right hand in his pocket and his left hand covering whatever he was holding, making it look like he had a gun. He had the scariest fucking look on his face, and I just knew that he was there now to come and shoot us. He shouts at us the whole time while walking towards us, and when he gets up close, he pulls out his phone and says, "Ha, just kidding." But he wasn't smiling. He was saying he was kidding with a pissed off rage face. My husband and my friend freak the fuck out on him, and my other friend is screaming at them trying to get them to back away. Somehow, the drunkest of us all finally says that an Uber is 3 minutes away, and she shows up super fast. The longest 3 minutes of my life. If he was drunk, it wouldn't have been such a big deal, but there's a whole new level of fear when you know you're dealing with someone who is just not mentally stable and unpredictable, or on some kind of drug. So, crazy eyes terrorizing people who are just too drunk to function? Fuck off and let's never meet again. This isn't the scariest story, but it definitely creeped me the fuck out. For background, I'm a 20-year-old female. I matched with this guy on Tinder a while back. His name was Nick, and he seemed pretty cool, so I gave him my Snapchat. We talk a little, but it died out pretty quickly. I didn't tell him the exact town I lived in, but I did tell him the city about 10 minutes away because it's decent sized and has a big population of people, and I figured he wouldn't be able to find me by just knowing that bit of information. A few weeks ago, he started messaging me, and we made small talk. Everything seemed normal for a while, up until New Year's Eve. The day before, he messaged me saying he was going to be in the area, the city I told him I was from, and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. I told him possibly, and I would let him know. The next night, I had a New Year's Eve party with a small group of my friends. I spent most of the day getting ready and was not looking at my phone. Around 7:30, I finally looked at my Snapchat and saw that Nick had not only messaged me, but also called me. I responded telling him I was sorry that I just saw his message. He opened it within minutes and totally freaked out. He said something along the lines of, "Just to let you know, I'm not really interested in someone who can't even answer the phone when I drove 6 hours just to see her." I looked at it in disbelief, and for a second I thought he was joking. I responded by asking him what he was talking about, and that he didn't drive 6 hours just to see me. He said that we had plans, and why else would he have driven up here? I was confused because we never had plans. He told me that he was going to be in the area, which made me think he was here for work or to visit a friend. It's not uncommon for people to travel here for work. I explained this to him and told him we did not have plans, and that I didn't ask him to drive all the way here for me. He told me he sat around for 2 hours waiting for me and bought me flowers. Again, I was confused because we never planned a time or place to meet and had never confirmed plans. You don't make plans by just telling someone you're going to be in the area. I apologized, but told him again that we never made plans. He told me to make it up to him. I had to drive up and see him tomorrow. Yeah, fuck that. I remembered that I had my location shared on Snapchat, so he easily could have shown up at my house. I turned off my location but kept him on Snapchat in case he tries to show up. Luckily, I have not heard from him since. My dad is a retired police officer and has a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it. So, Tinder creep who drove 6 hours for me, let's not meet. This all happened Tuesday night. My significant other Kyle and I went to an absolutely fantastic concert for New Year's Eve. We met up with a few friends, but they all left right after midnight. The bands were great, so we wanted to stay for the rest of the show. Kyle got a call from a good friend, Nathan, around 1 a.m. Nathan said he was at the same bar and wanted to know if we were still there. We were stoked because Nathan never gets out of the house. He's a super cool guy and we love hanging out with him. He had his girlfriend with him, who I like a lot, and his friend Derek. I don't like Derek at all. Derek just gives off a creepy vibe. He talks slow and monotone, and he stares for far too long and leans in way too close. He's basically Nathan's pity friend. They were best friends for a long time, and Derek's family did a lot for Nathan during a rough time. Nathan will bring him along every now and then because he feels obligated at this point, but he has no trust in him whatsoever. Derek is a drug addict. Anyway, we all hang out and have some laughs. Derek sits there being freaky as usual, just staring at everyone. When he would speak, it would be something off the wall and completely unrelated to anything we were talking about. Once he looked at Dawn and I and said, "I think it'd be really weird if you two made out." Okay, yeah, it would be weird. We ignored him and kept having fun. The bar closed down, and Kyle asked them if they wanted to come to our house and have some more drinks and play foosball and Tekken. I was a little annoyed because he didn't okay this with me first, and I was ready for bed. I wasn't that upset though. I know that Kyle likes to have company. I told Kyle that I wouldn't mind if it was just Nathan and Dawn, but I don't want Derek in our house. I don't trust him. Kyle brushes it off and says, "What's the worst that can happen? It'll be fine. He's just weird." Well, when we're all leaving, we had to wait for Derek in the parking lot for the longest time. It turns out he was waiting outside the door of the bar and trying to get any girl to come with him, bribing them with free pills. I got mad and said, "What makes you think it's okay to invite random people to my house?" He just laughed. We get to my house, and he sits on the couch by me. He keeps poking me, and when I ask what he wants, he just stares for about 10 seconds before saying, "What's up?" I started ignoring him. He continued to poke me, or even tried to tickle my feet. I wouldn't even look over. Then he starts getting phone calls from people asking for pills. I went to the bathroom, and he tried to follow me in there. I just pushed him out and locked the door, and he continued to knock. After this, he starts trying to get Nathan and Dawn to take him home, which was 45 minutes away, and it's 4 a.m. They tell him no way, that they had agreed that he was staying with them. They actually wanted to go to their house and sleep in their own bed, 10 minutes away. He didn't want to go to their house. He either wanted to go home or stay at our house. He started whining and telling me that I had to convince them to stay. I told him no. He started saying that Dawn had drank too much to drive. The girl had 1 beer the entire night. When they were going to leave, Derek comes back in and says he has to use the bathroom. Kyle is overly trusting of people and doesn't pay attention to weird behavior. I'm the opposite, so I was keeping my eye on Derek. I caught him going through my prescription bottles. They were nothing but antibiotics, but it pissed me off that he was trying to steal from us anyway. I told him he needed to leave immediately. He then stood in our kitchen, refusing to leave, staring at us. I said that they were waiting on him, and he needed to go with them. He kept staring and said, "Don't you remember that time I gave you guys a ride? Well, make it even. You either convince them to stay, or I stay here and y'all take me home." No way. He gave us a ride home when we had a flat once, and we lived 2 blocks apart at the time. We're not going 45 minutes away to take a weirdo home that's refusing to leave, for reasons unknown. He just kept saying that Dawn was drunk. Kyle speaks up and says, "If you get in a roadblock, I'll come get you." He says, "Well, are you going to post the bail too? Because we're your responsibility now." I am beyond frustrated at this point and told Kyle, "You invited them, now get rid of him." I went and sat on the couch. Derek continued to stand there and stare at Kyle. Kyle, normally passive, is getting angry and telling him it's time for him to go, and that we aren't taking him home or convincing anyone to stay. Derek says that he's not leaving, so he has to do one or the other. Kyle finally went outside and got Nathan to come, literally dragged Derek to the car. The next day, Nathan called and asked if we were missing an iPhone, because Derek mysteriously has one now. Yes, in fact, my old iPhone was missing from the drawer. It was off, and I'd rather just let Derek keep it than communicate with him further. Nathan has apologized profusely and says that he isn't bringing Derek around anymore. This happened some hours ago. To give you a bit of context, I'm a male in my early 20s, and I live in an apartment on the 2nd floor. I come back home from a New Year's Eve party around 6 a.m. I undress myself, text a couple of people, and then go to bed. All this in the span of about 10 to 15 minutes. Then basically, as soon as I get into the bed, I hear my doorbell ring. Not my actual door, but the gate to the apartment complex. Initially I say, fuck it. It must be a drunk person or someone pulling a prank or being an asshole. But then the motherfucker keeps ringing very insistently, so I go in my boxers to answer the quote phone that is wired to the gate. I answer it, and I hear a foreign-sounding guy that is trying to tell me something about a friend, and keys, and to let him into the complex. I think about it for a second, and then I tell him, "I don't know you, I'm not going to open the gate." I hang up, and then I go to bed again. They keep ringing very insistently, so I get up again and go answer the phone, this time a bit angry. But this time I'm greeted by a girl speaking perfect English, I live in Italy, and telling me in a very clear way that she's staying on the 5th floor and her friend has the keys, that she is a woman alone in the street, and to come check it at the door if I don't believe her. She sounded very convincing, to be honest. Mind you, in this moment, I'm drunk, high, and very tired, trying to weigh my options. What if she really is a girl all alone in the street at 6 a.m., in the cold and with all the drunk people going about? What if she isn't, though? Fortunately, even in my intoxicated state, I have the idea to go out on the balcony over the gate and check out who is in the street. I throw on my parka, because it actually is pretty cold, and in my boxers, I go out on the balcony to have an absolutely fuck you moment. There were 4 seedy-looking people, 2 males, 2 females, if I saw correctly, right in front of the gate, talking quietly between themselves. I yell at them. I shouldn't have done it. "Oi, you wanted to come in?" And immediately go inside to call the police and grab a knife. Yeah. The real scary thing is that my gate is not see-through. So if I went down, I wouldn't have seen outside, and as soon as I opened the door, I would have been overpowered by them, and probably forced to let them in my apartment. The story pretty much ends here. The fuckers, though, kept ringing the bell aggressively for another 15 minutes while I took off the lights and went around my house like a drunken Rambo with a knife in my hand, checking periodically all the windows. I have windows on the internal courtyard and windows on the street which they could have easily have climbed, or so I thought. I don't even know if the police saw anyone or came at all, because I never heard from them again, and I just went to bed after a solid hour of this. Still, burglars that tried to take advantage of my good faith to lure me into a trap, let's not ever meet again. When I was younger, each New Year my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning. So, around 2 a.m. we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things got really weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside our car windows, the only shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive, and I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was around me because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in the car. So, when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. A lot of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city, and he left it at that. Despite his sureness, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car, and entertained ourselves with watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear window. We got tired pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. But this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that my mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Pull over, right in front of the police. Pull over right now, Miguel." And he did, and the car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car literally right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked us what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us, and taunted us. The policeman took her claim seriously, and told us of how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals, and then he offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved, until about 10 minutes later when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw the car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting.